Can we see a trade? Will the Montreal Canadiens go after either of these behemoths on the blue line? Today, we are talking about the Habs and their right side D, because it's been a pretty intriguing conversation over the last few years. Just which names are appropriate on the right side, which names can suit up on the right side, and which names will continue to play on that right side. Noah Dobson is the number one big bad on the right side of the Canadiens' D-core. Lane Hutson is there because there are too many guys on the left. And then Alexandre Carrier is fine. I mean, I'm not going to go out there and shade Alexandre Carrier, but then again, it's like, hey, he's a very serviceable defenseman for the role that he provides with the Montreal Canadiens. He's 29 years old. He's in the prime of his career. He's making a small amount of money. He's good. Also, he was like just under half a point a game in the playoffs this most recent campaign, which is kind of remarkable if you ask me. Anyways, when you think about the right side of the Canadiens' blue line, you honestly don't think too much about Lane Hutson. Sure, he can play the right side. He's only doing it now because it's a necessity. But long term, you would probably hope to see Hutson be the number one left-handed D instead of Mike Matheson, instead of Struble. Maybe only Gooley is a name that you could realistically say belongs on a top pair, depending on what kind of team it is. But with that said, David Reinbacher ain't here yet, and the Montreal Canadiens potentially could be looking for some right-handed options. This is where we dive into what Anthony DeMarco said on the Campbell vs. Gallo show earlier this month. The D-men that the Montreal Canadiens have been searching for, a big right-shot guy. We heard that they have been tied to Rasmus Ristolainen, or maybe even a Brandon Carlo, at the trade deadline. Now, this is a pretty interesting piece of info. Obviously, we know that when it came to the trade deadline and the Montreal Canadiens' plans at said deadline, they were mostly focused on acquiring Toronto Maple Leafs forward Matthew Knies. They put all of their chips into the Knies basket, and they wanted to see that through. Unfortunately, it was Brad Treliving's fault that Knies ain't a Canadian right now, because the trade was conversed, the trade was agreed upon, the trade was just submitted 1 minute too late. Now, here's the thing. Matthew Knies is a Toronto Maple Leafs forward. Brandon Carlo, while he is currently a St. Louis Blue, he was playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs in the 2025-2026 campaign. And the unfortunate part about Brandon Carlo is the fact that this guy was making $4.1 million a year this previous campaign. He'll still be making that heading into the next season, which is the final year of his deal. But he was making $4.1 million, and he was not the 15-point in 79-game defenseman that he was in Boston. He had 7 points in 55 games. And Brandon Carlo quickly made a fool out of himself with Toronto Maple Leafs fans and media. Not because of anything he said or anything he did off the ice, but because Brandon Carlo sucked in a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. Like, I get it, you can say there weren't really many things to cheer for as a Toronto Maple Leafs fan this previously completed campaign. I mean, William Nylander had 79 points, but he missed a whole bunch of time. John Tavares, big pay cut, but when he's going out there and legitimately outproducing Austin Matthews, you kind of have a problem there. A lot of guys were going out there and disappointing in Toronto, and Brandon Carlo is arguably one of the biggest names to have done that. They were eager to get this guy off of their gosh darn team, which is why he got sent over to the St. Louis Blues in a blockbuster trade for 2 third-round picks. A lot of Maple Leafs fans will look at the trade price that they used to acquire Carlo in the first place, Fraser Minten plus a first-round pick for him, absolute terrible return for Brad Treliving. The fact that this guy was such a highly coveted defenseman for Toronto, and he inevitably just became what he was. Now, we're talking about the Montreal Canadiens. They were linked to Carlo at the deadline. They were potentially linked to Rasmus Ristolainen around the same time. Could they revisit those conversations? Who really knows? For Brandon Carlo, I think this is a guy that I would want the Canadiens to stay away from, because just based off of what he had done in Toronto, I feel like he's a name that would actively make the Montreal Canadiens worse this upcoming season. Ristolainen, on the other hand, is a guy that has slowly started to reshape his reputation around the National Hockey League. 31 years old, 6'4", 220, a right-handed guy, making $5.1 million a year till the end of 2026-2027. He's been making around the same dollar amount per year for the past decade, as his last contract straight out of his ELC saw him making $5.4 million a year. Now, the problem was, throughout that time, Ristolainen wasn't really seen as the best quality option. Now, you can debate that actually, in retrospect, is a foolish thing to say, because he had 40-point seasons back-to-back with the Buffalo Sabres. But the reputation for Ristolainen wasn't really all too great. When you talked about defensemen that just kind of scored points but didn't really do well in their own end, Ristolainen was that guy. And as the years went on, his point production went down, and his contract remained the same. So, over time, Ristolainen, especially as a member of the Philadelphia Flyers, had to do a lot of work to get that reputation back to a spot where fans felt like he was an acceptable player at that dollar amount. And even though this season you'll see 14 points in 44 games, you'll see 5 points in 10 playoff games, that's not the best. I'll admit, half a point a game in the playoffs is actually pretty impressive, but in the regular season he only had 14 points. While that's not the best per se, Ristolainen has really fixed all the holes in his game that made people clown on him a decade plus ago. Like, I am honestly befuddled thinking about the way Rasmus Ristolainen has found to shape his reputation in a more positive light after being kind of mixed into that boat of big right-handed dudes who don't really do too well in their own zone and who get lumped into the same conversation as guys like Tyler Myers and, Tucker Poolman, I guess. Ristolainen was scoring a ton of points back in Buffalo. And even though the Sabres absolutely sucked, Ristolainen was getting brought down with them. I think that he was a guy that was definitely worth $5-something million a year back in the day. Heck, with the rising cap now, this dollar amount ain't too bad anymore either. $5.1 million per season. If the Montreal Canadiens really wanted to tighten down on their decor, if they want somebody to play with Caden Gooley on the third pair, a guy like Rasmus Ristolainen would be such a force. Thinking about Gooley and Ristolainen together, that gives me flashbacks to, Shea Weber, Ben Sherratt from the Stanley Cup Playoffs 5 years ago? That's the same kind of vibe that I get from what this idea could present. Brandon Carlo, on the other hand, I don't think he's that great anymore. I think he definitely overstayed his welcome in Toronto, even though he was only there for 75 total games, in the regular season at least. Carlo is going to have to do some work to fix his reputation in the same way Rasmus Ristolainen has over his time in Philadelphia. But do you think either of these guys could be Montreal Canadiens targets? Could the Habs and Kent Hughes revisit these trade talks? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.